On September 1, 1859, a solar flare hit Earth's magnetic field so hard, telegraph operators got electric shocks through their own equipment. Some telegraph lines kept sending messages after operators disconnected the batteries entirely because the atmosphere itself was carrying the signal. That is the Carrington event. And the stakes are simple. If it happened today, it would not just knock out telegraphs. It would take down the power grid that keeps your hospital running, your water pumping, and your food refrigerated, potentially for months. In the next few minutes, we're going to show you exactly why 1859 was survivable, why 2026 is not, and what the world is actually doing about it right now. Let's start with the question everyone gets wrong. Is a Carrington-level event rare? The answer is no. That is the first myth to kill. Solar physicists estimate a storm of that magnitude has roughly a 12% chance of hitting Earth in any given decade. Think about that number. Not once a century. Not a black swan freak accident. A 1 in 8 chance, every 10 years, that we take a direct hit from the sun. We got a warning shot in 2012, a coronal mass ejection of comparable strength, that missed Earth by about 9 days, because our planet simply wasn't in the way yet. 9 days. That's the margin we're working with. Here is the single most important thing to understand before we go further. This isn't about the sun getting angrier. It's about us getting more exposed. In 1859, human civilization ran on candles, horses, and copper telegraph wire. Today, it runs on an interconnected electrical grid that spans entire continents, tied together by transformers the size of small houses, most of which take 12 to 18 months to manufacture and install. That gap between how fragile our infrastructure has become and how little we've hardened it is the real story here. So, what actually happens, mechanically, when a coronal mass ejection slams into Earth? Consider the physics for a second, because it explains everything that follows. The sun periodically launches billion-ton clouds of magnetized plasma into space. When one of these clouds strikes Earth's magnetosphere, it compresses and distorts our planet's magnetic field. That distortion induces electrical currents in anything long and conductive on the ground. Pipelines, railways, and especially high-voltage power lines. These are called geomagnetically induced currents, or GICs. They're a form of direct current bleeding into a system built entirely for alternating current. And transformers hate that. GICs cause what engineers call core saturation, essentially forcing a transformer's magnetic core past its design limits, generating enormous heat and harmonic distortion inside equipment that was never built to handle it. That is why a strong enough storm doesn't just cause a blackout. It can physically destroy the transformers that make the grid work in the first place. And those aren't off-the-shelf parts. Large power transformers are custom-built, often overseas, and a country like the United States has essentially zero domestic spare capacity sitting in a warehouse somewhere. Lose enough of them at once, and you're not looking at a repair job. You're looking at a rebuild, measured in years. Now, bring that back to 1859 for a moment, because the historical case study here is not just a curiosity. It's the baseline we measure everything against. During the Carrington event, the aurora was so intense that people in Cuba and Hawaii reported seeing colored lights in the night sky, far outside the normal polar range. Telegraph systems across North America and Europe failed or behaved erratically. Some operators described sparks jumping from their equipment. But here's the quiet detail that matters most. Almost nothing else was affected. No refrigerated food supply. No hospital ventilators. No satellite-based GPS. No digital banking system processing trillions of dollars in transactions every day. The 1859 storm hit a civilization that simply didn't have much to lose electrically. That's not resilience. That's luck of timing. Connect that back to today, and the picture shifts fast. In March of 1989, a geomagnetic storm, smaller than Carrington, but still significant, knocked out the entire Hydro-Quebec power grid in about 90 seconds. cutting electricity to 6 million people in the dead of Canadian winter. 90 seconds. Not a gradual brownout, a cascading collapse triggered by protective relays tripping in response to the induced currents. That event is the real-world proof of concept for everything we're describing. A storm meaningfully weaker than Carrington still managed to black out a major grid in under 2 minutes. Let's address the conspiracy angle directly, because it comes up constantly, and credibility means naming it. Some corners of the internet claim solar storm warnings are exaggerated or fabricated, a distraction, a control narrative, a reason for governments to justify grid spending. That's not what's happening. This isn't a hidden threat being invented. It's a well-documented, well-measured physical phenomenon tracked in real time by satellites like NOAA's Discover spacecraft and the Solar Dynamics Observatory. The actual failure here isn't secrecy. It's under-preparation. Utility companies, regulators, and governments have known about GIC risk for decades. And the hardening work, installing blocking devices, building spares, upgrading monitoring, has moved at a pace that does not match the scale of the risk. That's not a cover-up. That's bureaucratic inertia colliding with an engineering timeline that doesn't move fast enough. And that brings us to the number that should actually keep you up at night. The KP index. This is the standard scale scientists use to measure geomagnetic disturbance, running from 0 to 9. A KP of 5 is considered a minor storm. Auroras might dip into northern US states, nothing catastrophic. A KP of 7 or 8 starts stressing grid infrastructure in higher latitude regions. The Carrington event is estimated to have produced disturbances so intense they're essentially off the current KP scale entirely. Some researchers place it at a hypothetical KP of 9+, a level modern instruments have never actually recorded because nothing that strong has hit us since 1859. That is the threshold we don't have real data for. We are extrapolating backward from historical accounts and forward from smaller modern storms to guess at what a true repeat would do. That gap in data is itself part of the danger. So what would an actual Carrington repeat look like on US or European soil in 2026? Researchers at institutions like Lloyd's of London and various federal agencies have modeled this, and the numbers are staggering. Estimates for direct economic damage from a severe geomagnetic storm hitting the US grid alone range into the trillions of dollars, with recovery timelines for the worst-hit regions stretching from months to potentially over a year, largely because of that transformer manufacturing bottleneck we mentioned earlier. No spare parts, long lead times, and an economy that assumes electricity is simply always there. Think about what that actually means for you, specifically, not as an abstract systems failure, but as a lived experience. No traffic lights. Water treatment plants that rely on electric pumps stop functioning within hours. Grocery store supply chains, entirely dependent on refrigeration and electronic payment systems, begin to break down within days. Hospitals running on backup generators, which themselves need fuel that has to be trucked in, through a transportation network that also depends on electronic controls and payment systems. This isn't a Hollywood blackout that resolves by the next commercial break. Depending on the storm's intensity and which regions take the hardest hit, this could be a slow-motion, months-long unwind of daily normalcy. That said, and this is the self-correction, the part that keeps this from becoming pure fear-mongering, not every solar storm is a civilization-ending event, and the grid isn't completely defenseless. Utilities do have some early warning capability. Satellites positioned about 1 million miles from Earth at a gravitationally stable point called L1 can detect an incoming CME and give ground operators anywhere from 15 minutes to about an hour of lead time before it arrives. That's enough time, in some cases, to take critical transformers offline preemptively, reducing the risk of permanent damage even if it means a temporary, controlled blackout. The difference between a controlled shutdown and an uncontrolled equipment failure is enormous. One is an inconvenience. The other is a multi-year rebuild. So here's what to actually watch. Going forward, if you want to track this risk yourself, instead of just hoping someone else is handling it. Number 1. Solar cycle activity. We're currently in an active phase of the 11-year solar cycle, meaning sunspot activity and CME frequency are elevated compared to the quiet years. Watch for NOAA space weather alerts, which escalate in real time as activity increases. Number 2. Grid hardening legislation. In the US, this includes ongoing regulatory action tied to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's geomagnetic disturbance standards. Watch whether utilities are actually complying with induced current mitigation requirements, not just whether the rules exist on paper. Number 3. Transformer stockpiling. A small number of countries and utility consortiums have begun building strategic reserves of spare high-voltage transformers specifically for this scenario. Watch for expansion or stagnation of these reserve programs, because that number is the single clearest indicator of how seriously this risk is actually being taken. Number 4. Satellite early warning infrastructure. DSCOVR, the primary spacecraft giving us that critical lead time, is aging, and its potential replacement schedule matters enormously. Watch for funding and launch updates on next-generation solar monitoring missions. Connect all 4 of those back to the core mechanism we described earlier. Induced currents, overwhelming transformers that can't be quickly replaced, and you have the entire risk picture in one frame. It's not a mystery. It's a known physical process, a known infrastructure vulnerability, and a known, if slow, response. The sun doesn't check a calendar before it fires. Statistically, we are due, and being due doesn't mean tomorrow, but it does mean the 12% per decade estimate isn't going away just because we're not paying attention to it. The real threat isn't the storm itself. It's the 18-month wait for a replacement transformer that no one stockpiled, in a grid that assumed this would always be someone else's problem to solve later. Watch the sunspot cycle, watch the transformer stockpiles. Those 2 threads, together, tell you almost everything about how ready we actually are. If this kind of large-scale hazard breakdown is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe, drop a like, and share this with someone who still thinks a blackout just means finding the flashlight. We'll see you in the next one.